6 months earlier, I stood in the driveway of what would become my first home, holding the keys with a sense of pride I had never experienced before. After years of saving every extra dollar from my contracting jobs, I had finally done it. The modest two-story house with light blue siding and white trim represented everything I had worked for. The real estate agent smiled as she handed me the final paperwork. "Congratulations, Mark. Willow Creek Estates is a beautiful neighborhood. You are going to love it here." I looked up and down the street, taking in the neat rows of similar houses with manicured lawns and tasteful landscaping. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalks while parents chatted in driveways. It was exactly the kind of place I had dreamed of calling home. A place of stability after years of apartment living and endless landlords. The moving process was exhausting but exhilarating. Each box I unpacked represented another piece of my life finding its permanent place. The living room filled with furniture that had waited in storage until I had a proper home for it. My television, gaming console, and books found their spots on the built-in shelves. It was not extravagant, but it was mine. On my second day, the doorbell rang. A middle-aged couple stood on my porch holding a basket of muffins and a bottle of wine. "Welcome to the neighborhood," the woman said warmly. "We are Tom and Susan from 3 doors down." They stepped inside, admiring the hardwood floors and the work I had already done. The previous owners never updated the place. "You have a good eye," Tom commented. They mentioned the community pool, the summer block parties, and the friendly atmosphere that made Willow Creek special. Later that week, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox labeled Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association Welcome Packet. I flipped through pages of rules and regulations, community guidelines, and a schedule of monthly meetings. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, so I set it aside to read thoroughly later. That was my first mistake. With the house mostly settled, I turned my attention to a purchase I had been planning for months. My contracting business was growing, and I needed a reliable truck for hauling equipment and supplies. The royal blue Ford F-150 was perfect, professional but not flashy, powerful enough for work but comfortable enough for daily use. The first time I pulled it into my garage, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Everything was coming together. For the first few weeks, life fell into a pleasant routine. Each morning I would back out of my garage and head to work. Each evening I would return, press the garage door opener, park inside, and close the door behind me. Occasionally I would leave tools or materials in the truck bed overnight, securely stored in my own garage. My neighbors waved friendly greetings, and I began to feel part of the community. What I did not notice during those peaceful early days was the woman across the street. From behind her pristine white curtains, she watched my comings and goings with growing disapproval. Her eyes narrowed each time my garage door opened to reveal the truck inside. Her lips pursed tighter with each passing day. While I was building my new life, she was building a case against me. The first confrontation happened on a crisp autumn morning. I retrieved my newspaper from the end of the driveway, coffee mug in hand, enjoying the peaceful start to my weekend. A deliberate throat clearing interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a woman standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed over her expensive-looking athleisure outfit. Her blonde hair was cut in a precise bob that framed a face set in what appeared to be a permanent expression of mild disapproval. "Good morning," I offered with a neighborly smile. She did not return the smile. "Good morning. I do not believe we have formally met. I am Patricia Winters, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." Her voice carried the practiced pleasantness of someone accustomed to getting her way through a veneer of politeness. "Nice to meet you. I am Mark, moved in about a month ago." Patricia nodded slightly. "Yes, I am aware. Welcome to our community. We take great pride in Willow Creek Estates. It is why many of us chose to live here." She paused, her eyes drifting toward my closed garage door. "I noticed you have been parking a rather large pickup truck on the property." I glanced at my garage, confused. "Yes, I use it for my contracting business." Her smile tightened. "I see. You might not be aware, but our HOA has specific guidelines about commercial vehicles. They can negatively impact the aesthetic appeal of our community." "It is just a standard pickup truck," I explained, "and I always park it in my garage." Patricia tilted her head slightly. "Even so, commercial vehicles are subject to certain restrictions. You might want to review Section 8.3 of your HOA covenant." With that, she turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder, "Have a wonderful day." I stood in my driveway, coffee cooling in my mug, bewildered by the interaction. It seemed odd but not particularly threatening. I dismissed it as the overzealousness of a board president meeting a new resident. That was my second mistake. 3 days later, I returned home from a long workday to find an official-looking notice taped to my front door. The header read, "Violation Notice," in bold red letters. According to the document, I was in violation of HOA Covenant Section 8.3. No commercial vehicles, trucks with commercial writing on their exteriors, vehicles with commercial equipment visible, or vehicles primarily used for commercial purposes shall be parked or stored within the community except within enclosed garages. I frowned at the paper in my hands. My truck had no commercial writing, no visible equipment, and was stored in my garage. How could this possibly be a violation? I read further. Violation: commercial pickup truck visible on property. Remedy required within 7 days to avoid fines of $50 day. That evening, I pulled out the welcome packet I had set aside and read through the entire covenant. The language was vague at best. What exactly constituted a vehicle primarily used for commercial purposes? By that definition, anyone who drove to work could be in violation. I composed a polite email to the HOA board, explaining that my truck was a personal vehicle that I sometimes used for work, had no commercial markings, and was always parked in my enclosed garage as specified in the covenant. I attached photos showing the truck safely stored in my garage and requested clarification on how this could possibly be considered a violation. The response came less than an hour later, from Patricia's personal email rather than the official HOA address. The message was brief. "The board has determined that your Ford F-150 qualifies as a commercial vehicle based on its size and observed use. The fact that it is parked in your garage does not exempt it from regulation. Fines will begin accruing if the vehicle remains on the property after the 7-day remedy period." I stared at my computer screen in disbelief. This made no sense. How could they regulate what vehicle I kept in my own closed garage? I wrote back asking for the specific criteria used to classify my truck as commercial and requesting a copy of the board meeting minutes where this determination was made. No response came that night, or the next day. The pit in my stomach grew as I realized the peaceful life I had imagined in my new home was already being threatened. What had started as an odd interaction was quickly becoming something more concerning. The sanctuary I had worked so hard to create suddenly felt less secure, as if the walls of my own garage were now made of glass, subject to the scrutiny and judgment of others. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation deteriorated rapidly. A second violation notice appeared on my door, then a third. Each one cited the same vague infraction, but the language grew increasingly stern, and the threatened fines multiplied. The latest notice warned of possible liens against my property if the violations continued, All this for a truck that never spent a moment outside my own garage. One evening, as I arrived home, I caught a flash of movement across the street. Patricia stood partially hidden behind a decorative shrub, her smartphone raised in my direction. She was photographing me as I opened my garage door. When she saw me notice her, she simply waved with exaggerated friendliness and continued taking pictures. The invasion of privacy sent a chill through me despite the warm spring evening. That weekend, I was raking leaves when my neighbor Tom wandered over. "Having trouble with the HOA?" he asked casually. "How did you know?" He chuckled without humor. "Patricia has a reputation. When she focuses on someone, word gets around." He glanced toward her house. "My wife and I got targeted last year for our garden gnomes. Apparently, they were excessively whimsical and detracted from neighborhood aesthetic coherence." Garden gnomes, that seems ridiculous. It is ridiculous, but that is how Patricia operates. She finds something, anything, and uses the HOA rules like a weapon. As we talked, two other neighbors joined us. Lisa from next door had been cited for having the wrong shade of white on her fence. Michael from the corner lot had battled the HOA over the height of his basketball hoop for months. None of their so-called violations were clearly prohibited in the written covenants. "Has anyone ever stood up to her?" I asked. They exchanged looks. "A few have tried," Michael said. "They either give in eventually or move away. Patricia has been president for 5 years running. Most of the board members are her friends or too intimidated to challenge her." That night, I spread the HOA documents across my dining room table. I read every page, highlighting contradictions and vague language that could be interpreted multiple ways. Section 8.3, about vehicles, referenced commercial vehicles, but never clearly defined what qualified as commercial. More importantly, I discovered that selective enforcement was explicitly prohibited in Section 2.1. Rules shall be enforced uniformly against all homeowners. With a new sense of purpose, I drove around the neighborhood the next day, noting at least 7 other pickup trucks similar to mine. Some sat openly in driveways. I documented each one with photographs, including street addresses. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I prepared my case meticulously, gathering documentation, photographs, and relevant sections of the covenant. As I walked into the community center, I felt confident but nervous. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs facing a table where Patricia and 4 other board members presided. When the meeting reached open forum for homeowner concerns, I approached the microphone set up at the front of the room. "Good evening. My name is Mark Wilson from Maple Street. I would like to address what I believe is selective enforcement of Covenant Section 8.3 regarding vehicles." Before I could continue, Patricia interrupted. "We are aware of your situation, Mr. Wilson, and the board has already made its determination. If you wish to appeal, there is a formal written process outlined in your welcome packet." "I'm not just speaking about my situation," I persisted. "I have documented 7 other pickup trucks in the neighborhood, none of which have received violations. This appears to be selective enforcement, which is prohibited by Section 2.1 of the same covenant." Patricia's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Those situations are not comparable to yours. The board evaluates each case individually based on multiple factors." "What factors specifically? Because the covenant language does not." She cut me off again. "We need to move on with the agenda. Your 3 minutes of comment time have expired." She nodded to the treasurer, who immediately launched into a report about landscaping expenses. I stood there for a moment, microphone still in hand, as the meeting continued around me as if I had disappeared. Eventually, I returned to my seat, frustrated but more determined than ever. I noticed a few neighbors giving me sympathetic glances or subtle nods of encouragement. After the meeting, several people approached me in the parking lot. "That took guts," one woman said. "Nobody challenges Patricia directly like that." "What she is doing is not right," I replied, "and I am not going to just accept it." Back home, I started a detailed log of every interaction related to the HOA issue. I researched state laws governing homeowners associations and discovered that many of Patricia's tactics existed in a gray area of legality at best. I began recording every conversation and photographing every notice. This was no longer about my truck or even about principle. It had become about justice and protecting my home. The file I labeled HOA Dispute grew thicker by the day, filled with evidence of what was beginning to look less like overzealous rule enforcement and more like personal harassment. The situation reached its breaking point on a sunny Saturday afternoon in late spring. I had spent the morning doing yard work, meticulous about staying within every HOA guideline for lawn maintenance. My grass was precisely the permitted height. My hedges were trimmed to regulation standards. Even my garden hose was properly stored out of sight. After finishing, I relaxed on my front porch with a cold drink, enjoying the fruits of my labor. The sound of automobile engines disturbed the quiet residential atmosphere. Two police cruisers turned onto our street, moving slowly with their light bars flashing. My neighbors paused their weekend activities to watch. The woman across the street stopped watering her flowers. The family walking their dog stood still on the sidewalk. The cruisers pulled up directly in front of my house. My stomach dropped as two officers stepped out and approached my property. They were professional and courteous, but their presence alone sent a wave of embarrassment through me. Neighbors were now openly starring. "Good afternoon, sir," the taller officer said. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes, officer," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there a problem?" "We received a complaint about illegal commercial vehicle storage and possible zoning violations at this address." The caller reported a business being run out of a residential property without permits. I stood completely stunned. "That is absolutely not true. I am a contractor, but I do not run my business from home. I just park my personal truck in my own garage." The second officer nodded understandingly. "Mind if we ask a few questions to clear this up?" As we spoke on my front porch, explaining the situation, I noticed movement across the street. Patricia emerged from her house, walking purposefully toward us. She wore designer sunglasses pushed up on her head and carried her smartphone in her manicured hand. "Officers," she called out before even reaching us, "I am the HOA president who reported this violation. I have documentation of the commercial vehicle." She held up her phone, presumably showing the photos she had taken of my truck. The officers exchanged a glance that suggested this was not the first time they had dealt with an overzealous HOA situation. "Ma'am," the taller officer said patiently, "parking a personal vehicle, even a pickup truck, in a private garage is not a police matter. There do not appear to be any zoning violations or illegal activities taking place." Patricia's composed demeanor cracked slightly. "You do not understand. The HOA covenant clearly prohibits." "HOA covenants are civil matters, not criminal ones," the officer interrupted gently. "If there is a dispute about homeowner association rules, that needs to be handled through your HOA procedures or civil court. It is not appropriate use of emergency services." Patricia's face flushed red. "That truck is destroying our property values. He is operating a commercial business from a residential zone. There are tools and equipment in that garage. The second officer stepped forward. Ma'am, having personal tools in a private garage is not illegal. Unless you have evidence of actual criminal activity, this is not a police matter. Seeing she was not getting the response she wanted, Patricia turned to address me directly, her voice rising to ensure the growing audience of neighbors could hear. Your truck has no place in this community. The board has ruled on this matter and you are accumulating fines daily. This is not over. I felt a surge of both anger and clarity. Calmly, I reached into my pocket and activated the voice recording app on my phone. Patricia, are you saying that your issue is with my truck being parked in my closed garage? My issue is with blatant violations of our community standards, that commercial vehicle. But the truck is in my garage, not visible to anyone. How exactly is that affecting property values or community standards? She stepped closer, finger pointed at my chest. The HOA has authority over all property use, including what is stored in garages, and I have every right to call the police when community rules are being violated. The officer stepped between us. Ma'am, please return to your property. Again, this is a civil matter. Making false reports to emergency services can result in citations for misuse of police resources. As the officers gave Patricia a gentle but firm escort back toward her property, I noticed several neighbors had their phones out, recording the entire incident. Others stood in small clusters, talking in hushed tones and casting glances in our direction. The taller officer returned to speak with me privately. Sorry about this, sir. Unfortunately, we get called to HOA disputes more often than you might think. My suggestion: document everything. If the harassment continues, you might consider speaking with an attorney who specializes in homeowner association law. After the police departed, I stood in my driveway, humiliation mixing with resolve. My phone contained a complete recording of the incident. Patricia's admission that her issue was with a truck inside a closed garage, and her confirmation that she had called emergency services over an HOA dispute. My next-door neighbor Lisa approached cautiously. That was completely outrageous, she said quietly. Patricia has gone too far this time. You know what the worst part is, I said. I have only opened my garage when leaving for work or coming home. She must be watching my house constantly to even know what vehicle I own. As I looked around the street, I could see the neighborhood had been transformed by this incident. People who had previously kept their heads down during Patricia's reign were now openly discussing what had happened. Some approached to express support. Others kept their distance but watched with newfound interest. The battle lines had been drawn. My driveway had become ground zero in a neighborhood now divided between those who feared Patricia's power and those who had finally seen it exercised too publicly to ignore. What had started as a private dispute had become a community spectacle, and though I never wanted to be at the center of such drama, I recognized that this moment might represent an opportunity for change. The Monday following the police incident, I took a personal day from work and drove downtown to meet with Sarah Chen, an attorney specializing in property disputes and homeowner association law. Her office was small but professional, walls lined with legal texts and framed credentials. So your HOA president called the police because you park your pickup truck in your own garage? Sarah asked, eyebrows raised as she reviewed my documentation. Exactly. And I have received multiple violation notices with escalating fines even though the covenant is vague about what constitutes a commercial vehicle, and specifically states that enclosed garages are exempt from many exterior restrictions. Sarah nodded, scanning through copies of the HOA documents, violation notices, and the transcript I had made of the police incident recording. "This goes beyond normal enforcement," she said finally, reaching into a cabinet to retrieve a folder. "And Patricia Winters is not an unfamiliar name in my practice." She slid several documents across the desk, case summaries of previous disputes involving Patricia and the Willow Creek HOA. These were all settled confidentially, which is why they never became public knowledge in your community. In each case, the HOA backed down when professionally challenged, rather than risking a precedent-setting court ruling. One case particularly caught my attention: a homeowner who had been targeted for parking a pickup truck in his driveway. The documents revealed that Patricia had previously owned a property near a commercial lot where contractors frequently parked their trucks. She had fought a losing battle with that property owner before moving to Willow Creek. This is not just about rules, I realized aloud. This is personal for her. HOA disputes often are, Sarah confirmed. Now, let us discuss strategy. You have several options ranging from direct negotiation to formal legal action. I left the meeting with a clear plan, and a weight lifted from my shoulders. Sarah would send a formal legal letter to the HOA board citing the specific ways in which the enforcement violated both the covenant's own terms and state law regarding selective enforcement. More importantly, I had knowledge and legitimate legal backing. That evening, I invited Tom and Susan, Lisa, Michael, and 3 other neighbors who had expressed support after the police incident to my home. Around my dining room table, we shared stories of Patricia's selective enforcement and intimidation tactics. She cited me for holiday decorations being up 3 days past the allowed date, Susan revealed. Meanwhile, her friend Janet on the board had decorations up until February with no consequences. Michael pulled out his phone. "I have been tracking HOA expenditures through the publicly available financial reports. Notice anything interesting about where landscape improvements have been concentrated over the past 3 years." His screen showed a neighborhood map with highlighted areas indicating major HOA-funded improvements. The heaviest concentration surrounded Patricia's home and those of other board members. "Classic cronyism," Tom muttered. "But what can we do? She has the board in her pocket and most homeowners are too afraid to speak up." "Not anymore," I said, sharing what I had learned from the attorney. "The HOA exists to serve the community, not to give power to a select few. What we need is organization and documentation." We formed the Neighborhood Alliance for Fair Governance that night. Each person took specific responsibilities. Michael would continue analyzing financial records. Susan, who worked in marketing, would create a private online forum for neighbors to share experiences. Lisa would quietly speak with other homeowners to gauge support. Tom would research the procedure for calling a special HOA meeting. My role was to be the public face of the challenge. The one person Patricia had already targeted who had nothing left to lose. I created a detailed timeline of every interaction, organized documentation of selective enforcement throughout the neighborhood, and prepared a presentation highlighting the discrepancies between written rules and actual enforcement. Our private online group grew rapidly. Homeowners who had suffered silently for years suddenly had a safe space to share their experiences. We discovered patterns of harassment, evidence of financial favoritism, and multiple instances where board procedures had been ignored or manipulated. Most significantly, we identified a critical opportunity. The HOA bylaws allowed for a special general meeting if requested by owners representing at least 20% of the homes. With each new member who joined our alliance, We moved closer to that threshold. 3 weeks after the police incident, we secured the required number of signatures. The formal request for a special meeting was delivered to the HOA board secretary, citing urgent community concerns regarding rule enforcement and financial management. Patricia could not legally prevent the meeting from being scheduled, though she attempted to set it for a Tuesday morning when most residents would be at work. We invoked another bylaw requiring reasonable accommodation for homeowner attendance. The meeting was rescheduled for the following Wednesday evening. The revolution that had started with a pickup truck in a garage had evolved into something much larger, a community finding its voice against years of petty tyranny. As we prepared for the confrontation ahead, I realized that my simple desire to park my truck in peace had catalyzed a neighborhood transformation that was long overdue. The community center was packed beyond capacity on the night of the special meeting. Folding chairs filled every available space with additional residents standing along the walls. The energy in the room crackled with tension and anticipation. At the front, Patricia and the other board members sat at their usual table, their discomfort visible even from a distance. Patricia called the meeting to order with forced composure, her gavel striking the sound block with unnecessary force. This special meeting has been called to address certain community concerns. As chair, I will maintain orderly procedure according to our bylaws. Each speaker will have 3 minutes, and discussion will remain civil and relevant. Tom stood immediately. Point of order, Madam President. Given that this special meeting was called specifically to address concerns about current HOA leadership, we move that an independent moderator conduct tonight's proceedings to avoid conflicts of interest. Patricia's knuckles whitened around her gavel. That motion is out of order. The bylaws clearly state. Article IV, Section 3, interrupted Michael, rising from his seat with a copy of the bylaws in hand. Special meetings called by homeowner petition may adopt temporary procedural rules by majority vote of members present. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. All in favor of independent moderation for tonight's meeting, Tom called out. The response was overwhelming. Hands rose throughout the room, well beyond the simple majority needed. Patricia's face flushed as she reluctantly stepped aside, allowing the HOA vice president, a retired judge who had recently joined the board and had not yet fully aligned with Patricia's faction, to take the moderator position. I approached the podium, carrying a folder of documentation and a USB drive. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady as a neighbor connected my presentation to the room's projector. Fellow homeowners, I began, my name is Mark Wilson. 6 months ago, I moved into this community, excited to be part of what seemed like a welcoming neighborhood. Today, I stand before you because that experience has been marred by selective enforcement, harassment, and abuse of HOA authority. The first slide appeared on screen, a side-by-side comparison of identical pickup trucks. On the left is my truck, which I park in my closed garage and which has resulted in multiple violation notices and even a police call. On the right is board member David Thompson's truck, parked in his driveway without consequence for the past 2 years. David shifted uncomfortably at the board table as neighbors turned to look at him. Slide after slide revealed similar inconsistencies. Homes with identical features where only some received violations, expenditure patterns showing preferential treatment, meeting minutes with key decisions made without proper voting procedures. This is not about a single truck or a single homeowner, I continued. This is about ensuring our HOA functions as it was intended, to maintain our community standards fairly and transparently, not as a tool for personal vendettas or selective enforcement. When I reached the slide about financial discrepancies, Patricia interrupted. These allegations are slanderous and without merit. The board has always acted in the best interest of. Perhaps we should hear the evidence before making that determination, the vice president interjected firmly. The most powerful moment came when I played the audio recording from the police incident. Patricia's voice filled the room. The HOA has authority over all property use, including what is stored in garages, and I have every right to call the police when community rules are being violated. Following the recording, I revealed the results of our research into Patricia's history. Before moving to Willow Creek, Ms. Winters was involved in a prolonged dispute with a commercial property owner regarding parked trucks near her previous residence. Court records show she lost that battle and moved shortly after. It appears she has been fighting the same war here, using her position to target trucks similar to those she objected to previously. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Patricia's face had drained of color. Other alliance members presented additional evidence. Lisa shared testimonials from numerous residents who feared speaking publicly. Michael detailed the financial analysis showing preferential treatment. Susan presented the results of our community survey revealing widespread dissatisfaction with current HOA leadership. Throughout the presentations, I watched the other board members' reactions. Their body language told a story of growing discomfort. One by one, they physically distanced themselves from Patricia, subtle shifts of chairs that symbolized a larger separation occurring. When the evidence portion concluded, the vice president opened the floor for general discussion. The dam broke. Residents who had remained silent for years now spoke openly about their experiences. Some shared emotional accounts of feeling bullied or targeted. Others expressed frustration with the lack of transparency in decision-making. Patricia attempted to regain control multiple times, citing procedural rules and challenging the validity of evidence. But her typical tactics fell flat in the face of overwhelming documentation and community solidarity. The pivotal moment came from an unexpected source. Margaret, the board secretary and one of Patricia's longtime allies, cleared her throat and addressed the room. "I joined this board to help our community," she said quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that purpose. What I have heard tonight troubles me deeply. I believe we need new leadership and a return to the values of fairness and transparency that should guide our association." The room fell silent. Patricia stared at Margaret in disbelief, the betrayal clearly stinging more than any evidence presented. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "I move for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." "Second," called several voices simultaneously. The vice president looked uncomfortable but nodded. Such a motion is within the rights of the membership at a special meeting. All those in favor of declaring no confidence in the current HOA president, please raise your hands. Hands rose throughout the room, not just alliance members but neighbors from across the community. Even two board members raised their hands, including Margaret. Patricia sat rigidly, watching as years of carefully constructed authority crumbled before her eyes. When she attempted to invoke a procedural rule to adjourn the meeting, the vice president shook his head. "The membership has spoken," he said simply. In that moment, looking at Patricia's face contorted between rage and panic, I felt no triumph, only relief that a community had finally found its collective voice. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Monday morning. Though not a board member, I attended along with several other Alliance representatives as observers. Sunlight streamed through the community center windows, illuminating the board table where a conspicuous empty chair marked the absence of Patricia, who had declined to attend. The vice president called the meeting to order with a solemnity befitting the occasion. Following the vote of no confidence at our special meeting, we must address the leadership vacuum. According to our bylaws, the board may select a replacement to complete the current term until formal elections can be held. Several board members spoke, acknowledging the need for healing and transparency. When Margaret nominated me for the interim president position, the suggestion caught me completely off guard. "While I appreciate the nomination," I said, standing to address the board, "I must respectfully decline. My goal was never to take control, only to ensure fairness. I would, however, be willing to serve on a newly formed ethics committee to help draft clearer guidelines for rule enforcement." The position ultimately went to Robert, a retired civil engineer who had lived in the community for 15 years and was respected for his fairness and attention to detail. The board also voted to create an ethics and transparency committee with rotating membership from across the community. The following weeks brought remarkable changes to Willow Creek Estates. The board conducted a comprehensive review of all outstanding violations, dismissing those that reflected selective enforcement. They revised vague bylaw language to provide clear, objective standards. Most importantly, they established a new communication framework that emphasized education and community building over punishment and fines. My truck remained in my garage, though occasionally I parked it in my driveway without consequence. The revised vehicle guidelines now clearly stated that personal vehicles of any type were permitted on private property, with reasonable restrictions only on vehicles with commercial markings or equipment being stored in open view for extended periods. 1 month after the special meeting, we held a neighborhood block party to celebrate the beginning of summer. Children played freely between yards, neighbors chatted over food and drinks, and there was a palpable sense of relief and community renewal. Several residents approached me to express gratitude for standing up when others had been afraid to do so. "You know, Patricia put her house on the market," Lisa told me as we watched the festivities. Sure enough, a "for sale" sign had appeared on Patricia's lawn the previous week. Occasionally, I would see her supervising the loading of boxes into a moving van, her expression carefully neutral when our eyes met across the street. On the day Patricia finally moved out, I felt no malice, only hope that she might find greater happiness in a community better suited to her preferences. As her car pulled away for the last time, I realized that what had started as a personal battle had transformed an entire neighborhood. That evening, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Neighbors walked their dogs, waving friendly greetings as they passed. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks without anxious parents watching for rule violations. My truck sat in the driveway, a symbol not of defiance but of reasonable freedom within a community. Tom stopped by with 2 glasses of lemonade, handing one to me as he took a seat. "You know, for all the trouble, I think Willow Creek is a better place now," he said thoughtfully. I nodded in agreement. It was never about the truck. It was about finding the balance between standards and freedom, between rules and respect. "To good neighbors," Tom said, raising his glass. "And to standing up for what is right," I added. As darkness fell and porch lights winked on throughout the neighborhood, I reflected on the journey from new homeowner to reluctant community leader. The true victory was not in defeating,